I remember one particular morning. The sunlight was pouring through the kitchen window, warm and golden. I was making parathas for breakfast. Rajiv came in wearing his work shirt, still unbuttoned, looking for his tie. Meena borrowed it for some reason, I said absent-mindedly, rolling dough. For a tie? He laughed. Something about using it for a DIY project? I smiled. Meena had always been eccentric. He grinned and walked out to find her. I didn't think much of it, but later that day when I was folding laundry, I found the tie neatly placed in Meena's drawer, not in the living room where she usually kept her things. For some reason, my heart hesitated for a second. Then I shook my head and told myself not to overthink. Family routines have a way of dulling your instincts. You trust because you want to trust. You see what you want to see. At family dinners, Meena and Rajiv would sit across from each other. They would tease, laugh, exchange stories about their day. Ananya and I would join in. Everything seemed normal. But slowly, Rajiv began coming home later than usual. He'd say there was extra work. Sometimes Meena would also be out with friends. Oddly, they both seemed to be out on the same evenings. I told myself it was just coincidence. One Sunday afternoon, while rearranging the living room shelves, I found a small, handwritten note tucked behind a vase. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It simply said, "Last night felt like a dream. I don't know where this will lead, but I can't stop thinking about you." The handwriting was Meena's. I knew it instantly. My heart thudded, but my mind refused to accept what it was suggesting. Maybe it was for someone else. Maybe she was writing a poem. She used to do that sometimes. I placed it back where I found it and forced myself to forget. I want to be honest. Part of me didn't want to face the truth because my life was built around the belief that I had a good marriage. Rajiv wasn't perfect, but he was my partner through thick and thin. We had survived financial struggles, family illnesses, raising a child together. Meena was my only sister. She had always relied on me, and I on her. The idea that they could betray me felt impossible. So I smiled through dinners. I welcomed Meena's help in the kitchen. I laughed at Rajiv's jokes. And every night, I lay in bed, listening to the same ticking clock, convincing myself everything was fine. One evening, Ananya called me from her college dorm. Her voice sounded thoughtful. "Mom, do you ever feel like something is off at home?" I laughed softly, trying to brush it away. "Off? No, sweetheart, everything's fine. Why?" "I don't know, it's just, when I was there last weekend, Dad and Aunt Meena, they looked at each other weirdly, like, I can't explain. It felt uncomfortable." I paused, but then I said, "You're probably imagining it. They're just close." She didn't sound convinced, but she let it go. And so did I. Weeks turned into months. Life went on, but little cracks were forming quietly beneath the surface, cracks that I refused to see. The changes began quietly. So quietly, in fact, that if you weren't paying attention, you'd miss them. And I missed them for a long time. Rajiv's schedule started shifting. He began leaving earlier in the mornings and returning home later at night. When I asked, he would smile tiredly and say, "Work is piling up. It's just a busy season." At first, I believed him. After all, he had always been responsible, the kind of man who took his duties seriously. But there was something different in his tone now. Less warmth, less conversation. In the evenings, when he came home, he no longer sat with me in the kitchen while I cooked, something he had done for years. Instead, he would head straight to the living room, where Meena was usually watching television or scrolling through her phone. Sometimes I'd hear them laughing softly from the next room, and there I'd be, stirring a pot of curry alone, trying to ignore the tightening in my chest. One afternoon, I decided to surprise Rajiv at his office with lunch. I had done this many times before in the early years of our marriage. It was a simple gesture, a way to spend a little more time together. I packed his favorite parathas and sabzi into a steel tiffin box, wore a light shawl, and took the bus downtown. When I arrived, his colleagues greeted me warmly. But when I asked for him, the receptionist hesitated. "She left about 30 minutes ago," she said. I'd checked my watch. It was just past noon. "Oh," I said, trying to sound casual. "Did he have a meeting?" "I think he said something about lunch outside." My heart gave a quiet, uncomfortable thud. I didn't want to jump to conclusions. Perhaps he had gone with clients. Perhaps there was some urgent errand. I sat on a nearby bench for a moment, the warm tiffin box on my lap, wondering if I should call him. I didn't. Instead, I took the bus back home. The ride felt longer than usual. When I entered the house, the living room was empty, but Mina's sandals were by the door. She hadn't gone out, at least not in the morning. I went into the kitchen, placed the lunchbox on the counter, and forced myself to breathe normally. An hour later, Rajiv walked in. "Oh," he said, surprised to see me home early. "I thought you had orders to deliver today." "I did," I replied softly. "I finished early." He nodded quickly and went to change. He didn't mention lunch, neither did I. A few nights later, something strange happened. Mina had started dressing up more often. At first, I thought she was just regaining her confidence after her breakup. She wore bright saris again, applied lipstick, put on perfume in the evenings. One night, while I was folding laundry in my room, I noticed her standing by the mirror in the hallway, adjusting her earrings. "Going somewhere?" I asked casually. She turned, slightly startled, then smiled. "Just meeting an old friend for dinner." "That's nice," I said. "Do I know them?" She hesitated half a second. Not long, but enough for me to notice. No, it's someone from my college days. You wouldn't remember." She left shortly after. About 15 minutes later, Rajiv received a phone call. He stepped outside to answer it. When he returned, he said he needed to check on a client issue and might be late. That night, I sat in the living room alone, staring at the shadows on the walls. The clock ticked steadily, but inside me, a small, unsettling silence grew. The following morning, Ananya called. Her timing was almost uncanny. "Mom, I'll be home next weekend. I want to talk to you about something. Please don't brush it off this time." Her voice was firm but gentle. "Of course," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "What's the matter?" "I'd rather tell you in person," she replied. I laughed lightly, though my heart began to beat a little faster. "You're sounding very serious." "I am," she said simply. "I'll be home Friday evening." After the call ended, I stood at the kitchen counter for a long time, hands resting on the cool surface. A part of me didn't want to know what she had to say, because knowing meant accepting that something was really wrong. Friday came. Ananya arrived home with her usual smile, but there was a seriousness in her eyes. At dinner, she sat quietly, observing. Rajiv and Mina were chatting about something that had happened in the neighborhood. Their laughter was soft, like a shared secret. I glanced at my daughter. Her eyes met mine briefly, and in that look, I saw it. She saw what I had been avoiding. Later that night, after everyone went to their rooms, she knocked gently on my door. "Can I talk to you?" she asked. "Of course," I said, sitting on the bed. She closed the door behind her, sat beside me, and took a deep breath. "Mom, I think Dad and Aunt Mina are closer than they should be." The words fell like a slow drop of rain, but their impact was heavy. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. She continued, I didn't want to say anything until I was sure. But I've noticed things. The way they look at each other, the way they disappear at the same time, the way they talk when you're not around. I stared at my hands. Ananya, they've always been close, you know that. She shook her head gently. This is different, Mom. I can feel it. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to protect the image of my family I had built so carefully. But my daughter's voice held no malice, only sadness. Please, she said softly, just keep your eyes open. I nodded slowly, and that night, for the first time, I lay awake not because of the ticking clock, but because of the silence between the ticks. It felt louder than anything else. The days after Ananya's visit felt heavier, as if the air in the house had changed. Nothing was said openly, but everything felt different. I began to notice things I had previously ignored. One evening, Rajiv came home later than usual. I was sitting at the dining table with a cup of tea, pretending to read a magazine. He didn't see me at first. When he entered quietly, I caught a faint whiff of Mina's favorite perfume on his shirt. It wasn't mine. "You're late," I said softly, keeping my eyes on the pages. "Yeah," he replied quickly, loosening his collar. "Meeting ran long." He kissed the top of my head and moved toward the bedroom. I watched him go, my heart tightening in a way that was becoming all too familiar. Mina walked in just a few minutes later, wearing casual clothes as if she'd been home the entire evening. She looked relaxed, almost glowing. "Rajiv's home?" she asked lightly. "Yes," I replied. She nodded and poured herself a glass of water. We didn't speak more, but the silence between us was different now. No longer easy, no longer warm. It was filled with things unspoken. I started paying closer attention without really meaning to. I noticed how Mina always seemed to know when Rajiv would come home, how she appeared in the living room minutes before his car pulled up, how he smiled a certain way only when she was around. I wasn't searching for proof. I was simply watching. And what I saw quietly hurt. One afternoon while cleaning the study, I found a small folded paper tucked into the back of Rajiv's notebook. My hands hesitated before opening it. It was Mina's handwriting again. "I hate that we have to pretend. Every moment with you feels like it's ours alone, and yet it's hidden. Sometimes I wish we could stop lying, but then I look at her and I can't." I sat on the study chair for a long time holding that note. The house was quiet. The only sound was the ceiling fan above me. My chest ached, but I couldn't cry. Not yet. I folded the note back exactly as I found it and placed it where it had been. My hands were steady, but my heart was anything but. That night, we all sat at the dinner table, the three of us, like so many times before, but now every glance felt magnified. Mina told a story about a neighbor's dog running away, and Rajiv laughed loudly, louder than usual. His eyes lingered on her face longer than they should have. Ananya wasn't home that weekend, but I could almost hear her voice in my head. "Just keep your eyes open, Mom." I did. One night, I couldn't sleep. The clock read past midnight. I walked quietly down the hallway to get a glass of water. As I passed the living room, I heard soft voices. Mina and Rajiv were sitting close together on the couch, talking in low tones. They weren't touching, but the closeness between them was undeniable. I stepped back before they noticed me. My breath caught in my chest. I didn't confront them. I simply returned to my room, closed the door gently, and sat on the edge of the bed in the dark. I didn't cry that night either. The tears hadn't found their way out yet. Instead, there was a quiet numbness, as if my heart was slowly preparing itself for what was coming. The next morning, over breakfast, I decided to gently test the waters. I sensed we were getting closer to something I couldn't ignore forever. It was one of those nights when the rain seemed to fall harder than usual, the kind that presses against the windows and makes the world outside feel distant and heavy. I couldn't sleep. Something in the pit of my stomach had been uneasy all day, and my mind kept turning over the little signs I had ignored for months. I decided to check the kitchen one last time before bed. Maybe a glass of water would calm me. I moved quietly through the dark hallways, careful not to wake anyone. The house was silent, except for the soft patter of rain on the roof. As I passed the living room, I noticed a faint light spilling from behind the curtains. It wasn't unusual for Mina or Rajiv to be up late, but something made me pause. The light flickered slightly. I leaned closer to the window and, without thinking, pulled the curtain aside just a little. What I saw stopped my heart. Rajiv and Mina were sitting on the couch very close. Not laughing this time, not teasing. Their hands were intertwined. Their heads leaned toward each other. The words weren't audible at first, but the way they looked at each other, with a kind of quiet intensity, the kind you only share in secrets, left no room for doubt. Then I heard a small whisper, "Mom." Ananya was standing in the doorway, her eyes wide, hand gripping the frame. She had followed me, worried about why I was up. Her gaze fell on Rajiv and Mina, and I saw the same shock mirrored in her face. We didn't speak, we couldn't. There was nothing to say. The silence between us was filled with pain, disbelief, and a protective instinct that I hadn't felt so sharply in years. Ananya's voice finally came, just above a whisper. "Mom, we can't just ignore this." I shook my head, tears threatening. "I know, Beta, I know." We stayed there for several minutes, frozen, watching. Not because we wanted to see, but because now that the truth was undeniable, it was like a new weight had settled over the house. Something we had been avoiding had finally made itself real. I remember thinking about every little thing I had ignored before. The laughter that lasted a second too long, the whispered phone calls, the late nights, the small notes I had found but tucked away. All of it pointed to this moment. And now, my daughter and I had to decide what to do next. Ananya turned to me, her voice firmer this time. "Mom, you need to wake up. We can't let this continue." I nodded slowly. The decision wasn't about anger. It wasn't about confrontation yet. It was about protecting ourselves, our family dignity, our trust, our peace. That night, we retreated quietly to our room. The house seemed heavier, colder. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights reminded me that nothing would ever be the same. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the storm outside. My thoughts weren't focused on revenge or punishment. They were on loss of innocence, loss of trust, and the quiet heartbreak of realizing that someone I had loved and trusted could hurt me in the most intimate way. And yet, through the darkness, I felt Ananya's small hand squeeze mine. Her presence was a reminder that we weren't alone, that together we could face the reality and reclaim something that mattered most, our strength, our dignity, and the bond between a mother and daughter. It was a night I would never forget, a night where the truth was revealed not in anger, but in quiet, undeniable reality. And it was also the night that marked the beginning of taking our lives back, carefully, thoughtfully, with the love that had carried us through everything else.
The days after the discovery were quiet, almost painfully so. The house felt different, heavier at times, lighter at others. Rajiv and Neena no longer moved about casually. Their presence was cautious, aware of the unspoken tension. But there were no loud confrontations, no arguments, no anger. Instead, there was a strange stillness, a calm acknowledgement of what had happened. Ananya and I spent those days together, talking, cooking, even laughing softly at old memories. She became my anchor, a constant reminder that even in the darkest times, family could be more than betrayal. It could be love, resilience, and quiet strength. One morning, as I brewed tea, Ananya came up beside me. "Mom," she said gently, "we don't have to let this ruin everything. We can still decide who we are." I smiled softly, feeling a tear slip down my cheek. "You're right, beta. We can't change the past, but we can control how we live from now on." And that became our guiding principle. We decided to give the house boundaries, clear, calm, quiet boundaries that allowed us to live with honesty but without fear. Rajiv and Meena had to accept that trust once broken isn't repaired with words alone. It takes time, patience, and accountability. I began speaking to Rajiv more directly, not with anger, but with clarity. "I will not tolerate secrecy anymore," I told him softly. "We must rebuild respect first if anything else is to continue." He nodded, ashamed but silent. Meena followed suit, avoiding excuses and simply acknowledging the truth of her actions. The days were long and slow. There were moments of awkwardness, moments of quiet tension, but there were also moments of understanding. Moments when I realized that people can make terrible mistakes, but the heart has a way of seeking redemption, if only it's allowed to face the consequences. Ananya became my partner in reclaiming our dignity. Together, we organized our routines, shared responsibilities, and reinforced our bond. Her maturity and courage were astounding. One evening, as we sat on the balcony, watching the sun dip behind the trees, she said, "Mom, we're going to be okay, right?" I wrapped my arm around her shoulders and nodded. "Yes, beta, we are. We always will be as long as we have each other." For the first time in weeks, I felt a calm settle over me. Not because the pain had disappeared, it hadn't, but because we had faced the truth together, and that made us stronger than anything else. I've learned that betrayal is like a shadow. It can touch your life and leave a mark, but it cannot define the light that still exists. My family will never be exactly as it was, but that's not the point. The point is survival, understanding, and choosing dignity over anger. I have chosen to focus on the love that remains, the bond with my daughter, the quiet moments of peace, and the knowledge that life is never perfect, but it is ours to live fully, even after heartbreak. Sometimes when I pass that old photo from our picnic years ago, I smile softly. It reminds me that life holds both joy and pain, sometimes in the same frame. And that is why we must cherish the love we still have and protect it fiercely. The truth changed everything, but in facing it together, Ananya and I found a strength I never knew I had. We found dignity, we found courage, and we found hope. No matter what others do, no matter how deeply trust is broken, love and resilience can carry you through, quietly, gently, and with unshakable strength. And that is the story of how my daughter and I reclaimed our lives, our peace, and our dignity.
I still remember the night everything changed. The house was quiet, except for the soft ticking of the old wall clock in our living room. It was the same clock that had hung there since our wedding day, 28 years ago. Its steady rhythm had always comforted me. But that night, every tick felt louder, almost like it was counting down to something I didn't want to face. I was sitting on the couch, holding a photo frame in my hands. It was a picture of us, my husband, my sister, my daughter, and me. All of us smiling under the warm afternoon sun. We had gone to a picnic by the river that day. My daughter was still in school then. My sister had moved in with us temporarily after going through a tough breakup. My husband had welcomed her like family, and I was grateful. I never imagined that the people in that photo would one day break my heart in a way I could never have imagined. When my daughter came home from college that evening, she found me staring at that picture. She sat down beside me, quiet at first. Then, in a soft voice, she said, "Mom, I saw something today. Something I wish I could unsee." My hands froze on the frame. I turned to her slowly. Her eyes were red, as if she had been holding back tears for hours. And in that moment, I knew something was terribly wrong. That night, the truth came out. Not in screams, not in chaos, but in quiet, devastating words that changed everything I believed about love, trust, and family. To understand how we reached that moment, I have to take you back many years, back to when my family felt whole. I grew up with one younger sister, Mina. She was lively, playful, and always full of energy. We were close, though very different. I was the quiet one, the one who cooked, cleaned, and followed rules. She was the free spirit, always chasing dreams and falling in and out of love. When I got married to Rajiv, my husband, she was my bridesmaid. She danced more than anyone that night. Rajiv always treated her like his own little sister. They teased each other, shared jokes I didn't always understand, but I liked seeing them happy. It felt like I had managed to keep my family close, even after marriage. Years passed, and we built a simple, peaceful life. Rajiv worked in a local firm, and I ran a small catering service from home. We had one daughter, Ananya. She was my world, bright, kind, with a quiet strength that reminded me of my late mother. She grew up watching us share meals at the dinner table, listening to her father's stories and her aunt's laughter. Mina didn't settle down. She dated different people, moved to different cities, chased jobs and passions. Sometimes she came home heartbroken, and each time I opened our doors to her. "This is your home too," I always said. She would sleep in the spare room, and the house would suddenly be filled with her chatter and perfume again. When she came back to live with us after a difficult breakup in her late 30s, I didn't hesitate. Rajiv agreed too. "He needs family right now," he said one evening over tea. I remember smiling, feeling grateful to have a husband who cared for my sister like that. The first few weeks were warm and ordinary. We ate dinners together, watched television in the evenings, and helped each other with chores. Rajiv and Mina often spent time talking in the garden after dinner. I thought nothing of it. They had always been close. Sometimes I would join them with a cup of tea. Other times I would finish up in the kitchen and hear their laughter floating in through the open window. Ananya, now in college, would visit on weekends. She loved her aunt and saw her as a friend more than an elder. "She's so cool, Mom," she would say, laughing at Mina's dramatic stories. Life felt stable, familiar, safe. But life has a strange way of hiding storms behind clear skies. Looking back, there were signs, little moments that I brushed aside as nothing. A shared glance that lasted a second too long, a sudden silence when I entered the room. A small change in Rajiv's tone when he spoke to her. But I ignored them all, because in my heart, betrayal simply didn't exist in my family.